Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Eternal Witnesses Podcast, your favorite competitive-focused modern and legacy Magic the Gathering podcast. I am Dan Atkins, and I'm joined by Michael Mapson. How are you doing, Mapson?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. This week, we are also joined by Dingo. How are you doing, Dingo?
You know what? I could have been better. Once again, missed top 16 of the standard challenge, despite having, 5-2 record. But that's okay. We're not here to talk about standard. We're here to talk about some modern, baby.
Yeah, this week we're going to focus on modern because we have the modern RCQ season coming up. It officially starts on April 4th, which was a few days ago, and it goes until August 2nd. So it's good. We're going to see a lot of modern. We haven't seen modern in a few different seasons. It's been 2 standard seasons in a row, but we're all excited about modern coming up. Just a little bit of background in case you missed it. So the promos are going to be Ancient Stirrings and Sowing Mycospawn. I myself don't like Sowing Mycospawn at all, so I'll probably just give it away if anyone wants it. I don't even want to see it. That's the legacy PTSD in me right there. But if you're in the US, the RCs for this season will be September 11th in Baltimore and October 9th in LA. I wonder where in LA it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Wow. Doesn't matter. I can't go to either, which is annoying.
Oh, no.
Do you want to come visit me, Mapson?
There you go.
I would love to. LA is an expensive flight and then an expensive hotel. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, I don't think I can get off work even if I wanted to, but I also don't want to pay that money. And then I have a wedding that I don't want to go to on September 11th.
All right, well, hear me out. I got a nice space in the closet for you if you need a place to crash, and I got extra copies of Nadu Winged Wisdom in there as well. So, you'll feel right at home.
Sick. Okay.
Are they in the trash can in the corner?
Deck in there too.
Perfect. I don't even have to pack.
Everything you need. So this week, first we're going to go through, and the modern metagame is honestly very similar to what it was a year ago. There's a few differences in some of the top decks, but we wanted to focus on is just how to attack these top decks. So when you're going to your RCQ, you're thinking, what am I going to play against? And what's going to be my game plan? What's going to be my strategy to really attack these decks? What sideboard cards should I be focusing on? So if you go into if you already know what the modern metagame in your specific store is going to look like, you can know how to tune your sideboard or what to look for there, or even for deck selection, what to look for. So what I'm going to start with is just kind of going through MTG Goldfish's top 8 or top 10 to 15 decks. If you're unaware, MTG Goldfish is a great resource for looking at the metagame snapshots. You can look at last 15 days, last 30 days, and it really gives you mostly percentages of how often they're played. A lot of it is mostly Magic Online, so maybe not exactly representative of what you're going to see on paper, but probably pretty close because a lot of people choose their decks based off of that. So before we go into it, anything you guys want to add? No. Sweet. All right. So the biggest deck that we've seen between now and, the last however long in Modern has been Boros Energy. It has just been top dog or top cat for a long time. It has just had multiple cards banned out of it, and it's still just up there. Honestly, I think Flage and Arena of Glory are just, it's a 2-card combo that might be the most powerful combo in Modern, or it's at least up there with all the other ones. So I think that long game engine from Flage can really get you going, as well as the grindiness of Ocelot Pride and Guide of Souls. So Mapson, if you're sitting across the table from this energy deck, how would you approach that matchup, regardless of what you're playing, just kind of basic broad strategy?
Yeah, so energy is, well, first it's really annoying, but at its core, it is kind of an aggro, sort of mid-rangey deck. But a lot of what it does is it goes wide. So sweepers such as Wrath of the Skies or Pest Control are very effective against it. Unfortunately, the deck is very resilient, so even if you kill all their creatures, they might still just have an Ajani that can take over the game, or you've killed all their creatures and now they have a fully stocked graveyard so that they can flage you. So those aren't catch-all answers, but definitely board, being able to attack the board like that. They're also not great against combo decks. I mean, their only real plan is to Goldfish. So decks like Storm or Amulet, I think, are historically pretty good against that deck. But Dingo, you've actually played the Boros deck. I still somehow have never picked it up. So I'm sure you have better insight than I do.
Yeah, so the Boros Energy deck, it tends to be pretty weak to cards like Wrath of the Skies, like you mentioned. However, a seasoned Boros player will not play into Wrath of the Skies super hard. They will, sandbag a lot of threats, or they'll wait until they have a Goblin Bombardment, so that way, even if they do get Wrath, they can sack their entire board and still inflict a pretty decent amount of damage to you, and then probably finish you off with a Flage or hasty, I don't know, Seasoned Pyromancer, hasty Voice of Victory, whatever they can haste off that Arena of Glory. When they get you down to a few life points, it's usually good enough. So despite Boros being weak to sweepers, I don't think it's as weak to sweepers as people tend to make it out to be. I think a lot of Boros players will tend to overcommit a lot of threats to the board early on and, actually get blown out by these sweepers. But in reality, it's a very, very versatile deck that's very hard to attack from multiple angles. Like, you need to have some graveyard hate for this Flash. You need to have an answer to a Planeswalker and a Ajani, because most of the time, seasoned Boros players will be able to flip the Ajani even if you go to kill it in response. They galvanic their own cat or do whatever they can do to flip it into a planeswalker and then have it be immune to Wrath Disguise. And then, if they plus it, it's up to 5 loyalty. It's hard to flage, hard to take it off the table in general. So very, very resilient deck. It has a lot of multiple angles of attack, and I think that's why it stood the test of time over the past year and a half to stay at the top of the meta.
Yeah, I agree. I think the big difference here is the player you're playing against can make a huge difference, whether just the one pyroclasm you have in your hand. Sometimes your opponent will just go like double Ocelot Pride, Goddess Souls, and then you just wipe their board and you easily walk away with the game. You play against that seasoned player and they'll just chip away one damage, 2 damage, 3 damage at a time until before you know it, you're at 5 life, and that pyroclasm only killed 2 creatures and they just are right back into it right after you wipe the board. That's huge.
Yeah, I think the main weakness of Boros at the moment is actually just other linear combo decks. We see Boros tend to be lower on the number of Blood Moons recently, so it's becoming weaker to decks like Titan, as well as it's playing less copies of Ranger Captain as it used to, so it's becoming a little bit worse against Storm, and it's worse against some of the other combo decks out there. In exchange, it's getting better against other popular decks like Affinity, because we see Affinity, on the rise, and being able to turn 1 Gap Cannoneer against Boros is one of the most powerful things you could do in the format. So it varies. It varies from build to build of Boros, but I think they're kind of skipping on a little bit of the combo respect at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to keep in mind, I think, when people play against Boros too, regardless of if you're a strategy that's like good against it, weak against it, is always be mindful of their graveyard size with those Flages and how much damage they can inflict out of nowhere. Keep in mind the Ajani just coming down and flipping. So just like being mindful and and trying not to put yourself in a position where you're dead to these things, because sometimes they're not presenting them, right? Like, you might see the Flagon Yard, but they're sandbagging the Arena of Glory. So just always be mindful of how one card can totally flip how much damage they have, because like a hasted Flage is all of a sudden 9 damage coming at you that you might not have expected. So just like being aware.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That would be
up to
12
damage.
right from the edge of the
Yeah.
battlefield.
Or 12, even worse.
And yeah, if they have 7 lands and one of them's Arena of Glory with no fetch lands, just a Flage off the top, you can't even surgical it in response or anything if they stack their triggers correctly, which they probably will. So, I mean, that's 12, that's 15 damage, if I'm doing that correctly, out of nowhere, which, that's going to kill most decks. So Flage, very, very strong. Arena of Glory actually is really the breaker there.
I can tell the amount of times that my opponent has hasted a Flage against me, and I just looked at that and I said, if that were Uro, I would win this game. But it's not, because I'm dead. I'm getting triple Lightning Helix right now,
Instead of drawing 3 cards and gaining, 9 life, you're just dead. Well,
Yeah,
they
I
gain
could
9
be
life
dead.
either way, so.
I can't beat 3 Lightning Helixes.
Yeah, that deck is strong. Yeah, so, pack your board sweepers, but, make sure to play around that hasty Flage. Don't always attack all out when they have Arena of Glory, or even if they maybe are sandbag in their hands. It's the main strategy we see there. If this guy's is very good, but it's not going to just win you the game, right? You got to have Wrath Disguise plus, follow up and a little bit of clock there too. Anything else to add for Boros Energy?
No.
Sweet. So next up on Goldfish for the last 30 days is actually Jeskai Blink. Now, this deck is interesting. I see it as it's a very fun deck to play, and I think it's probably only like a 50% win rate deck, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic where it's very synergistic. And it still has Flage, Arena of Glory, but it's relying a little bit more on the Ephemerate Quantum Riddler game plan, a little bit more value, but it still has, Ragavan on turn 1 that can sometimes just get you enough value that it gets the game there. So with this more mid-range, a little bit more less linear than Boros Energy, how would you attack this deck? We'll start with Mapson.
I'll be honest, I actually don't know how people attack this deck.
Mhm.
I feel like I've only played Titan into it, and I haven't played that much with the deck. I do think it's kind of just generically powerful and good against most things. I do think it is another deck that is going to struggle against decks that go over the top of it, but there's not a lot of them. But the ones that come to mind are Amulet, probably Goryos, and like Tron and maybe Eldrazi variants. I think just going bigger would be conceptually how I would attack it, but yeah.
I actually thought that the same thing as you, that Tron would be a good matchup for Jeskai, but according to the recent data that's come out, apparently Tron has like a 40% win rate or less against that matchup, which, to me, it seems a little bit weird, but I think with the consigned memory and then post board, they get access to multiple Charmaz. It could be really hard for Tron. In my opinion, the best way to attack Jeskai Blink is by playing Teferi. They have such a hard time beating Teferi Time Raveler because they're more centralized on playing at instant speed with Felia and Riddler, and oftentimes like their goal is to ephemerate Riddler, and if that gets bounced by Teferi and then they can't play instant speed, they don't have a lot of burn spells to beat Teferi. They have Flage and they have Galv. So if you are able to plus your Teferi very quickly against them, that, in my opinion, is the best way to beat Jeskai Blink. If you're not playing a Teferi deck, things will be harder. Oftentimes, because there's also one more point I want to bring up about Teferi, is now that they've replaced Fable with Casey Jones, they're relying more heavily on Casey Jones to draw them 3 to 6 cards, and then they want to consign the Casey Jones trigger or replicate consign for multiple Casey Jones triggers. And that's where like preventing them from playing at instant speed is huge. But other than that, I would say probably the best way of getting them dead is just by doing kind of the incremental chip damage thing, kind of how Boros plays against a lot of other decks, is they have a finite amount of life gain in the deck between Flage and Solitude. But if you're able to chip away at them and kind of, I wouldn't say play the long game against them because it's really hard to play the long game against a Riddler deck in general. I would just try to play the tempo game. Always keep in mind that if they have 2 mana and they pass the turn, they probably have a Felia. So you always have to play around Felia. But I think the deck got a little bit more high rolly and less consistent with the addition of Casey Jones over Fable, because Fable's a card that adds a lot of consistency to your deck. Casey Jones is very, very powerful if you have the consign or if you can play at instant speed to dump your hand before you need to discard all your cards. If you're unable to do that, I don't think Casey Jones is super powerful. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that sense, where Casey's faster but less consistent and Fable's slower but way more consistent.
Yeah, I like that. It feels like Fable kind of raises the floor a little bit of the deck where Casey may raise the ceiling. Another card that I think was pretty good against is I played the Esper Blink deck against it, and Overlord the Bailmark was really good, being able to recur those Solitudes so then you don't care too much about Flage, or just a 5/5 can be a real beating for that deck. They might be able to block with their Riddler, but if you have an answer for that, then honestly that value can be hard for them to deal with, as well as having the Teferi. But another card that is seeing a little bit more play now that I've also started playing is Orcish Bowmasters. Obviously a legacy staple, but doesn't see as much play in Modern outside of that like a blue-black flash deck. But I've really enjoyed Orcish Bowmastering this deck when it can kill a Ragavan, or if they do play Casey Jones, that just feels great. Or even Riddler, they're trying to dump their hand to draw extra cards, and you can just punish that pretty easily. So Orcish Bowmasters is another good way of attacking this Jeskai deck.
Yeah, I think the main problem with the Orcish Bowmasters at the moment is that there's no dedicated Bowmaster deck that's actually like doing well at the moment. And I think like if there was one, then we'd see a lot less Jeskai Blink around.
Yeah, I agree. All right, the next deck on our list is Affinity. Now, Affinity, very strong deck. I think it might be the strongest deck in the format. It just has Kappa Cannoneer, which no matter how many Wrathus guys you bring, it's probably not going to kill a Kappa Cannoneer if they could just get that down before you have all your mana on board. They have really explosive draws, and it's really, Mox Opal is just very, very powerful. So just the combination of having multiple effects like Pinnacle Emissary, as well as weapons manufacturing to create a wide board that can just create bodies for attacking, and then Kappa Cannoneer just to finish it out and create something that's hard to interact with. So how would you interact with this deck?
So Affinity, I still have very not great opinion of this deck, but I think it's very hard to interact with a game one. I think game two, you can bring in a lot of answers in terms of cards that are just targeted against the archetype. Your Force of Vigors, Engineered Explosives could be effective, Collector Oov, Karn the Great Creators. Not that people are really sideboarding that card, but I think the big thing is just knowing how to time your interaction against the deck, because I think there's a lot of windows where you can really stop them. But if you just kind of wait, then you get really just blown out. I think this deck has a lot of tricks to it, and so I think it really, really punishes you for not understanding how it works. But I think just being able to understand it and pick your moments can go a long way.
Yeah, you did mention Karn. I feel like Karn can be very good if you're able to get it down in time. But if they just start with like a Pinnacle Emissary or just a quick Kappa Cannoneer, sometimes it's just not even quick enough. And it doesn't stop you casting a Kappa Cannoneer, which can be rough. How about you, Dingo?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just lose.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well. Like, I think Affinity is the only deck in the format where you can just look at their opening 7 sometimes and just go, I just lose. I cannot be a turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer ever.
Mhm.
90% of decks in the format cannot beat a turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer. At least, I would say. Your best bet against turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer is either kill them on turn 2, if you're like Storm or something, or you have to like Subtlety it and then Mystical Dispute it back on the way down, like something really complicated just to be able to kill this turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer. But that's why I think Affinity's the best deck in the format. I think Affinity mulligans terribly. It is one of the worst decks at mulliganing because it's a critical mass deck. You need X amount of artifacts in your hand plus a payoff or whatever, or you can get away with Urza Saga as well being your payoff. That doesn't matter. But if you need like a certain amount of 0-drop artifacts and a Pinnacle Emissary or something, and a weapons manufacturing, whatever it may be, you need like A plus B, but it requires so many cards because the B is just a bunch of 0-drop artifacts. Because of that, it's the most powerful game 1 deck in the format, in my opinion. You will probably win game 1, I would say probably 65% of the time, depending on the matchups. Because you also have counter magic too. You have Metallic Rebuke to stop what your opponent's doing. If your opponent's playing another combo deck, oftentimes you just go Pinnacle, where you play a bunch of zeros, have X amount of 1/1 flyers, and then pass the turn with Metallic Rebuke and just be clocking your opponent, and they can't really do anything about it. That's why my vote for the best deck in the format right now is Affinity. I think it's got the best game 1, and post-board, you have to deal with a lot of nonsense if you're Affinity, but it doesn't even matter sometimes. If your opponent's packing infinite Wrath Disguise and Meltdowns, whatever, and you just turn 1 Kappa, none of those matter. None of those matter. And it's not that hard for that deck to turn 1 or turn 2 Kappa Cannoneer. I'd say it happens like more often than not. For that reason, I think Affinity is the best deck in the format. One of the best cards you could play against Affinity is Mystical Dispute, because if you're able to tag Pinnacle Emissary with Mystical Dispute or Kappa Cannoneer, I think you become significantly further ahead. But Affinity has the counterplay of playing Emery post board, so even if you do tag it and they, untap and play an Emery, suddenly if you don't deal with that Emery, and spot removal is not very good against Affinity most of the time, but if you can't deal with that Emery, you're going to lose the game. So very resilient post board, has some more angles of attack to go to, has main deck engineered explosives, so it can deal with like some Vexing Bobble nonsense, even though it shouldn't be able to, just because you can go like engineered explosives on 1, crack it, and then play all my zeros and kill you. So I think Affinity's great right now.
Yeah, I agree. The Emery game plan is definitely rough post board because, like, especially if you're like a Fatal Push deck, like you don't want Fatal Push against that deck, but you kind of need something to answer Emery because, like you said, if you just counter the Kappa Cannoneer and they could just cast it again every turn, like you're going to lose that game.
It's funny. I agree with so much of what you just said, but I just have not come down on the deck being that good. And, I'm probably just wrong because it continues to put up results, but I don't know. It feels so disjointed. It felt disjointed when I played the current list. It's felt disjointed when I've played against them. I do think the fact that it has to mulligan, or I think it kind of needs to mulligan to a good hand, but also can't afford to, which you kind of touched upon. And I think that is just kind of a structural problem. And maybe I'm just letting these things weigh on me more than I should. Honestly, that's probably the case because I love mulligans, but I don't know. I just have such a hard time believing it's the best deck. I still think it's a good deck. It just feels misbuilt to me. I don't know.
There's a lot of variants of Affinity. I don't think anybody's really settled on a stock list of Affinity at the moment. There's like the weapons manufacturing builds. I've seen Ravenous Robots builds. I've seen Krang builds. Kappa Cannoneers in all of them, of course. People, I think, are just experimenting a lot with the deck. And when Affinity mulligans, you feel it. Like, that deck sucks when it mulligans. Like, you don't do anything. If you mulligan to 5 and you're just sitting there playing the deck and you're like, what am I doing with my life? I like, you just draw like a Memnite or an Ornithopter for turn and you're like, okay, I guess I'll play my Fiery Islet pass. And then it's just like, I don't know. So it's one of the most polarizing decks of all time to play and to play against, because I feel like this deck is 100 or 0. It either does nothing or it crushes you not close.
Yeah, when I've played this deck, it felt like my hand size, like the opening hand size was like averaging at 5.5 cards, just with how frequently I had to mulligan, because like you have nothing and then your top decks are so bad. But those opening hands that you do get to keep 7 or even 6 that can be really explosive really feel unbeatable, especially when you have, you know, counter backup for like their one Rathos guys that they were banking everything on and just counter it. They just doesn't matter. Yeah, so best way to attack this deck, Rathos guys obviously very good, but you know, don't discount having removal for Emery and then your own counter magic to counter Kappa Cannoneer. All right, the next deck in the Goldfish top decks is Ruby Storm, actually, which I don't actually see a lot of, but it's there and it's pretty strong. So Ruby Storm, a strategy that you have a mana reducer, whether it's Rao Monsoon Mage or Ruby Storm. This is a storm combo deck where you're just casting a bunch of spells, usually exiling them with a impulse type effect until you can eventually wish or pass some flames into a grape shot kill. So, Mapson, how would you approach this deck?
Yeah, so this deck is kind of interesting, right? Because I feel like it plays on such a different axis than almost everything else in the format. It's a combo deck, so you want to say counterspells are good against it, but it often doesn't feel that way because they're so redundant. It relies on Past and Flame, so you often want to say like Grave Hate is good against it, but I don't know. I feel like it often just doesn't do enough. Like I would bring it in if I have it. I don't think it's what you can play to beat this deck. The cards that I think are most effective are things like Deafening Silence, things like Heathersworn Canonist. And that's not to say, again, like you do bring in the Graveyard Hate if you have it. You do play the counter spells if you can. But really, those Deafening Silence effects are, I think, the most impactful. It is worth noting that they do have Aurum Chant for your counterspells. They do have like endings that they can bring in for your permanent based hate. So like you can't keep a hand that just has like 6 land silence and be like, oh, this is good, I will survive. Like you still have to be able to kill them. But yeah, I think the permanent based hate is the most effective.
Yeah,
How
like
about
you
you?
mentioned, disruption plus a clock is kind of the key to be able to beat that deck. If you give them too much time, they're going to draw out of whatever situation that they can because all of their cards they draw to for the most part. Honestly, I think Storm's biggest weakness is itself. I think the deck fizzles way too much. Reckless Impulse not being a draw to and instead being like an exile to matters a lot because certain times they'll hit like a really good card for next turn, but they need to kill you this turn. And it's like, okay, if this were a draw two, things would be a little bit different. Maybe I could sculpt my game plan around it. Maybe, you know, you hit 2 lands off of it. You can only play one of the 2 lands because you already hit land drop for turn. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Also, the RNG on RAL flips is the most frustrating thing ever. If you pilot the deck, if you play against the deck, you're like, oh my gosh, they're so lucky. They cast their last spell, they flipped their RAL, they ulted it, and they killed me. But it's inconsistent while also not being consistent. There's a high variance when you're going off with that deck, and I think that's what holds back Storm more than anything else, because it does have answers to all of the sideboard hate. It's got Prismatic Ending for High Noon, Prismatic Ending for Deafening Silence, Rest in Peace, whatever white permanent cards that your opponent brings in for it. It's got Worm's Chant for counter magic. It has, you know, whatever you need really to be able to prevent the deck from getting locked out by your opponent. But the problem is, can you answer all those things while also making sure you don't fizzle your combo? And that's the hard part about Storm. And that's where you'll see a lot of the seasoned Storm players continuing to play the deck over and over. And those are typically the Storm players that put up results because they get themselves into these situations often where they have to make decisions of like, what's my best way of getting myself out of this High Noon while also making sure I have enough resources to be able to combo off in the same turn.
Yeah, High Noon is a card that we're seeing in basically Every white deck has at least 2 of these in the sideboard that I'm seeing. It's interesting. I'm also seeing some people bring them in for Affinity. I feel like it's not actually that great against Affinity. Sure, it can be good if you get into like turn 2 or turn 3, but like that's not going to stop their turn 1, turn 2 large impact play. So I just wanted to bring that up a little bit. Like, don't be relying on your high noon effects against Affinity. But for Ruby Storm, it is very good, but you will have to back it up with something else, because if you're just sitting there, like Maps had said, just making land drops, they're eventually going to get out of it. Because, wear, tear, prismatic ending answers every permanent. Yeah, they're going to get through it. I mean, you got to hope that your clock is quick enough and they exile a bunch of lands in a row, something like that.
Honestly, I would say the single best card against Storm is Ranger Captain, because it sits on the table, and when they go to answer it, it will silence them that turn. So they have to wait an entire extra turn cycle just to be able to combo off. So I would say if you want one card where you're like, my meta is full of Storm and I'm an energy player or I'm a Blink player, try Ranger Captain. Why not? It's so good against them.
Yeah, that is a really good one. Though I wish the cards were draw, not exile. So if I could play like Orcish Bowmasters against them, would actually do something. But 2 mana, make 2 1/1s doesn't do anything against Storm. So the next deck, Amulet Titan. So this is one that we have an expert here. So Amulet Titan is also a deck that has been around a long time, longer than Energy. And it's a deck, it's a permanent combo deck that uses lands, the enter the battlefield, the bounce lands that make 2 mana, and it uses Amulet of Vigor and Splunking for them to come in untapped, which makes a bunch of mana, casts Primeval Titan, eventually through a few different ways. Either it's copying Primeval Titans or returning a bunch of lands from the graveyard with Aftermath Analyst. It's just going to kill you pretty quickly. So it's typically a turn 2 or turn 3 deck. Mapson, how would you approach this deck as someone who often plays it?
So first, I want to agree with you. The deck's been around for a while. It's basically always been good. One could say it has remained tier 0 or 1 through metas with KCI, Hogak, Eldrazi, Oko, Mox Opal, Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, Faithless Looting, Golgari Grave Troll, Dredge, and to this day, the deck is always the most broken thing in Modern and just avoids bans by being hard to play. But yeah, the deck is really good. I would say the easiest way to beat it is just play in a metagame where your opponents aren't playing it, because that is going to be most RCQs. You're not going to have Amulet Titan players, or if you do, they're going to be pretty bad. No offense to that person. However, you are going to be in areas where you have like 5 Amulet Titan players and they're all good. It's kind of like an all or nothing thing. The cards that are best against it are Blood Moon and Harbinger of the, Seas, Tides, whatever the blue moon card is. Harbinger is better than Blood Moon. Ashiok is also a problem. Again, you have to have pressure to go with those cards. Damping Sphere is a problem, but don't put Damping Sphere in your deck just to beat Amulet. If you want a card that's also going to hit like Storm, it's also going to hit Tron, then you can play Damping Sphere. But Damping Sphere by itself is not enough. Harbinger by itself is enough. I hate that card.
I've played many Harbingers against you, Mapson, and for some reason you haven't smiled as much as I've smiled every time I've played that card.
Brainstone is pretty decent, although I think I've won through more of them than I've lost to. But in theory, it should be good, like circling their Titans. But yeah, just play the Blood Moons.
Little correction there, Mapson. It's the Stone Brain, because Brainstone is the Brainstorm artifact. But nonetheless, I think Titan is obviously a great deck. If you have to play, if your hate against Titan is something that can get hit by Beseiju, you better hope you have a good game 1 against Titan, because they have a lot of Beseijus post board. They have up to 4, and they're only getting more tools with every set that comes out. Also, they've gained Aftermath Analyst recently. They've gained pretty soon in Strixhaven. Maybe they're gonna play that new Pithy Needle on a land, right? So Titan keeps getting more tools. It's really hard to play against if you don't know what the points of interaction are to be able to stop them. My best recommendation for playing against Titan is play the deck yourself and try to figure out some simple lines and then see where your opponent is interacting with you, so that way you gain knowledge about where you should be interacting with Titan. That would be my best advice, because Titan is so complicated that I can't say for certain, like, this is the de facto place to be interacting with them, or this is the best card to use to interact against them, because I don't think that that's set in stone. I think Titan is so complicated while also being so resilient and complex, and they could pretty much play around so many different things. They just have to endure the mental load of, do I have to play around consign and this and surgical and that, and it's just too much. But generally speaking, land hate's good against them, graveyard hate's okay against them, and like removal spells are pretty bad against them. Artifact enchantment hate's good. Being able to blow up Urza Saga is pretty good. So those are just general, very surface level tips for how to beat Titan. But in reality, I would say go on Magic Online, write yourself a Titan deck, and be prepared to lose $10 trying to figure out how the deck works, because it'll help you out in the long run.
Yeah, it's also important to have something that is going to bridge you to your hate piece. So if your hate piece is a 3-mana Ashiok, make sure you have some kind of interaction on turn 1 or turn 2, or you might just lose before you can get that Ashiok down. So whether that's a Thoughtseize or something to get you there, I think that's pretty important, because I've definitely died before with my 2 or 3 mana hate piece in hand and been on the draw and just nothing I could do about it. But like you said, there's a lot of different cards that are good. And if your opponent is good and can play around a lot of them, you're going to have a hard time. But if you have a few different ones, whether it's like one consign, one surgical, it can make it very difficult for your opponent. So that's really important to kind of stretch out your answers and not just have, 4 Blood Moons or something that they can just pack a Force of Vigor and just answer everything with one spell.
Yeah. Another thing none of us mentioned is, yes, the deck can do these infinite loops with Analyst and or Lumra. Not that anybody who's really playing Lumra, but while we have access to these lines, a lot of times I see people so focused on shutting those down, and like they don't have a plan for us just making a 6/6 and attacking. So just like be mindful that yes, they have the combo, but they don't need to combo, and a lot of times they don't. They just like make a Titan or 2 and attack. So you have to have a plan for that as well, whether it's just like casting a bunch of subtleties or casting a bunch of solitudes. But yes, 6/6s will just end your life total very quick.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Living End Plan B, where they just cast a bunch of big creatures, and when you're sitting there with all your graveyard hate, it's just like, oh, I just died to this, 6 mana or 4 mana creature that, I usually would be pretty good against. That is definitely a good point. All right. Anything else on Amulet Titan? Awesome. Next one is actually Eldrazi Tron, which I was surprised to be as popular as it is. But Eldrazi Tron is Tron, also a deck that's been around Modern a long time. So it's using big mana from the different Urza lands to cast things like, in this case, Thought-Knot Seer, but typically Ugin, Eye of the Storms, and Kozilek's Command, which is an absolutely broken card. And usually just once they cast an Ugin, I don't think I've ever beaten an Ugin in my life. Some of that has to do with the decks I like to play, but they could be at 1 life and they cast an Ugin and wipe your board, start gaining life, and it can all be over. But this is also a land strategy, so some of the stuff that we said that applies to Amulet Titan can also apply here. But Mapson, how would you approach attacking Tron?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of what we said about Amulet works here. Your Blood Moons, your Sinkhole effects, your Damping Sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Consigned Memory is insanely good against them. Having a Quick Clock is pretty good against them. If you wanted to be an absolute psycho, maybe your meta's overrun, you could play Painter Servant and make their Ugin's Labyrinth worse.
Painter Servant legal in Modern?
Yeah.
I was just
I mean, you shouldn't.
Stone is not.
You shouldn't actually play it because it like only stops like Glaring Fleshraker and Ugin's Labyrinth, and I guess it messes with Ugin, but it would be funny. So there's always that. Got anything to add, Dingo?
The only time I've seen a Painter Servant is when somebody was playing the Tron Mirror and they used Karn to go tutor up a Painter Servant. That was the only time I've ever seen a Painter Servant, ever, was so that way they could start exiling all of the colorless stuff on their opponent's board. Tron is probably the easiest deck in Modern, I would say. If you've been out of the Modern game for a while and you're just looking to pick up a deck and just jam some RCQs just for the hell of it, and you want to do decently well without having any reps, I would say Tron's probably the deck for you. It's not super hard. The hardest part about Tron is just figuring out mulliganing decisions, but Devour of Destiny has added a lot of consistency to that deck, and with the addition of Ugin's Lab and Eldrazi Temple. You don't even really need to assemble Tron on turn 3 anymore for the deck to have success. As we mentioned, we didn't stress this enough. Kozilek's Command is a broken card, and it is the best card in the deck. It's not close.
I don't understand why it's better than all the other commands, and it's colorless, and it's an X spell. Like, why? Why does it have so many abilities? Why is it also
Well, you
creature
see, if it
removal and
wasn't
graveyard hate?
it wasn't an X spell, it wouldn't be broken, so it had to be an X spell.
Like, I feel like they could have just left it at what's the Eldrazi Confluence? It's the 4-mana one. That card's, I think it's a commander card, so I don't think it's legal in Modern. But I feel like that card's great, and that's what Kozilek's Command should have been. But
yeah,
yeah,
probably.
that card is bonkers. But yeah, just approaching with a lot of the same deck. We already talked about Jeskai Blink. Already has 4 Consigned to Memories main decks. So that's a great place to start if you're really struggling with Tron. But it's definitely a deck that if you're seeing a lot of it, there are very clear ways of beating it. Just pack the land tate that you want, or all the Consigned to Memories that you want. All right, the next deck we're seeing is Goryo's Vengeance. So this is a little bit of a hybrid between a mid-range deck and a graveyard combo deck. So it uses the cards Goryo's Vengeance to return a Atraxa or a Gristlebrand into play. It'll ephemerate that creature, get a bunch of value, end up attacking your life total, but it also relies on Quantum Riddler to provide a strong mid-range strategy, and Psychic Frog as well. So this is a deck that has been popular recently. I've seen it a little bit more. It did well at a recent tournament. It's interesting. I feel like it's a very strong deck, but can struggle from just drawing the mid-range game plan when you're trying to combo, or perhaps doing the opposite of what you want. It's kind of 2 decks smashed together. So Mapson, how would you approach this deck if you're sitting across from it at the RCQ?
Yeah, respect both plans, because you can die to the mid-range plan, you can die to the graveyard plan. Play Grave Hate, and honestly, I say this both as a serious suggestion and also because of time. Listen to the Jerry T podcast. Both hosts are very avid Goryo's players. They're going to give you a lot more advice than you're going to get here. Dingo.
So actually, I just trophy with Goryo's today. I had started a couple of games off stream because I was helping my girlfriend prepare for a tournament. She wanted to play Goryo's or Energy, so I was playing some Goryo's. I was like, going into that league, I was like, I don't think Goryo's very good. I was telling her, I was like, I don't think you should play it. I think it's a bad choice. It's inconsistent. Then I ended up like 5-0ing this league, and everything felt great, and the stars aligned, and I surveilled Atraxa, and I'm like, oh, this deck's broken. But it's so like inconsistent. Really, the deck has high highs and low lows where you're just gonna draw an opening hand. You're like, I have a Force Negation, a Solitude, an Ephemerate, no other white card in my hand. My hand doesn't do anything. It's garbage. I'm gonna mulligan it. I drew a 6 with 2 Atraxas and no way to discard it. I'm going to 5, and then suddenly your tournament's ruined. Well, I think that the deck is very, very powerful when it does its thing. It's also up there with Affinity, where in my mind, it's not as powerful as Affinity when Affinity has its best draws, but it's not as inconsistent as Affinity either. So if it were like a sliding scale between power and consistency, I'd put it somewhere in the middle, not quite as powerful as Affinity, but not as inconsistent. And then, every deck's on this scale, I would say. A lot of decks in Modern sacrifice power for consistency. I think we see that time and time again, and this deck is no different. And as you mentioned, Graveyard Hate is great against it. A way to deal with Psychic Frog is great. Having a plan for Riddler Ephemerate also helps. Teferi is very good against that deck too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Teferi, another strong plan against this deck. So much of the deck is just interaction, specifically free interaction with Solitude, and Force Negation and Ephemerate. So yeah, having a Teferi in play, and then a strong Graveyard Hate strategy. All right, the next ones we'll go through a little bit quicker. But first we have Neobrand, which is a combo deck that uses free casting Allosaurus Rider, and then you Neoform into a large creature and then attack your opponent. This is a potentially, was it turn 2, or can this go off turn 1? Does it have, no, this would be a turn 2 strategy, but very quick, has Pax Mitigation to back it up. This is really as glass cannon-y as you can get, where if you playing against energy or something that is not interacting with you, you're going to have a good time. You're going to kill them really quickly. If you're playing against counterspell, you're going to have a really bad time. So, Mapson, how would you approach this?
Vexing Bauble is insane against them. Yeah, Vexing Bauble is just like the best thing you can do. Consign to Memory can also kind of ruin their day sometimes. Yeah, those are the big ones. Counter spells, but specifically Consign to Memory and Vexing Bauble, because Vexing Bauble means that they can't resolve their Allosaurus Rider and they can't resolve all their many packs that they play.
Yeah, I want to add to this. I actually played this deck at the Pro Tour, the last Modern Pro Tour. I played against a Yawgmoth player who had, it was like a Yawg Brood-Scale hybrid, and they had one Vexing Bauble in their deck. And they mulliganed to 4 just to draw this one Vexing Bauble. And they played it on turn 1. I just lost. I lost this one Vexing Bauble. But in reality, Neoform does have a lot of counterplay to Vexing Bauble. Veil of Summer lets you cast your spells through Vexing Bauble still, as well as Consign to Memory lets you consign the Vexing Bauble trigger when it goes to counter your Allosaurus Rider as well. So if you could assemble the right pieces, it takes a lot of time because, Neoform is one of those critical mass decks as well, where you need like Allosaurus Rider, green card, Neoform, and lands at least, right? So you need a very full hand playing Neoform, and I think it suffers a lot of the same issues that Affinity does, where it's like when you have to mulligan, you really feel it. And, hate pieces are very powerful against you, probably more powerful against you than it is against Affinity, because, Affinity gets to play Metallic Rebuke and other main deck answers to it and more resilient stuff like Urza Saga and Emery. And I see these poor Neoform players trying to play Ice Fang Coatl and trying to Neoform it into Oculus just to have some sort of resemblance of a plan B. And it's like, what are we doing here? We're playing a 2-mana 1/1 Flash Flyer. That's not going to get you the money bags that you needed to, right? So I would say Neoform, again, on that scale of like power level to consistency, very high power level, very low consistency, very glass cannony, probably the most glass cannony deck in the format.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The next one we have is Domain Zoo. So this is a strategy that uses Leyline of the Guild Pact to give your creatures every single color and your lands all the different land types. You have Scion of Draco, which is a great 2-card combo. Turn 2 Scion with the Leyline out is hard for a lot of decks to beat, specifically Energy. But it's a deck that is still pretty intensive on, it has Leyline Binding as well, so it's pretty intensive on the different types of mana, and the mana can be pretty rough here, but it does have a little bit of counterplay with Stubborn Denial as well to protect some of its threats. Some of the versions are playing Doorkeeper Thrall, which can be a powerful card against something like Amulet Titan or other effects that require Enter the Battlefield triggers. Mapson, how would you approach playing against Domain Zoo?
Yeah, so for me, personally, I've had a lot of success with just casting the card Force of Vigor against them. And I think that may be a controversial take because I've definitely had people tell me that's terrible and you shouldn't bring it in. So every time I blow up Leyline of the Guild Pact and like a Leyline Binding or maybe a Scion that doesn't have a Leyline out or whatever else, it feels really good. Outside of that, I don't know that it's that easy to just like attack this deck on any specific angle. I think the deck is like kind of well-rounded, but it's also just like kind of mid. So I think like the best thing to do is just like play your deck and hope your hands line up well against it, which is like not a great answer, but maybe Dingo will have something more insightful than I have no insight.
Well, I would say one of the best cards against them is arguably Fatal Push. Being able to kill a Kavu for 1 mana is huge.
That's
Being
true.
able to kill their Ragavan is pretty important. If you're playing like a fair interactive deck and you're playing like Energy, for example, or something a little bit slower and more fair, and they open Leyline of the Guild Pact and you don't have Consign to Memory in your deck, you're going to cross your fingers and pray to somebody higher up that they don't have Scion of Draco. Otherwise, you're just going to get smushed. So Energy is supposed to be a good matchup for Zoo, but according to some of the Matrix data that came out recently, Zoo has been getting dumpstered by Energy. And in my opinion, if you are playing Zoo to be able to beat Energy and you're still getting dumpstered by Energy, maybe it's not the best deck choice to be playing at the moment. It does have a very good matchup against some of the combo decks like Storm and Neoform because you get the pressure of like a 5/5 Kavu back with a Stubborn Denial. If you can survive that long, it's pretty dang solid. But I don't really see a good reason to play Zoo, especially since you're a victim of Consign to Memory yourself, because Consign to Memory hits the Scion of Draco as well as Leyline Binding. Leyline Binding just gets countered by a single Consignment Memory, which feels really bad. So all these decks packing 4 main deck Consignment Memories already have a good matchup against you. I don't see a good reason to play Zoo. I'm going to be completely honest. If you're planning to play against Zoo, I would say don't respect it. Just don't respect Zoo.
Yeah, it's not a deck that I would say you need specific sideboard hate for. If you already are bringing in some kind of enchantment hate, whether it's like Wear Tear or something, that could be useful. But I wouldn't dedicate too much sideboard hate, especially for this deck and all the decks moving forward. They're less than 3% of the meta. So a lot of these are not going to be cards. So it's like, all right, I have my one card and I know it's going to be just to kill this matchup. Unless you know the room is going to be full of that deck, I wouldn't necessarily bring something specifically to beat these decks. I think it's more important just to develop a game plan for them and know how you're going to approach the matchup, less than bringing a sideboard that is definitely going to beat that matchup. There was a time in Modern where it seemed like every single deck was packing a Leyline of the Guild Pact and Scion of Draco in it, if it could. Like just every deck would just have 4 of those. There's the Rhino deck that was playing that and whatnot. Those days are gone. So I would say you're not gonna, it's less likely you'll see this deck, but there are still the people who love it. So it may still be out there. All right, so the next deck we have is Prowess. So this is just a hyper aggressive strategy with Slick Shot Show Off, casting a bunch of spells, usually Quarry Steel Cutter as well. Just very aggressive. This is gonna be a strategy of just trying to get you deal 20 damage as quick as possible. So those strategies, like fetching, shocking, Thoughtseize, can be really, really tough against this deck. That's something that I did last night at Modern. I was on the play, fetch, shock, Thoughtseize. They reveal a bunch of burn spells and a Slick Shot Show Off. I died very quickly because they only had to do 15 damage. So if you know you're playing against it, maybe be a little bit more conservative with your life total. But Mapson, how would you approach this?
Yeah, so the Prowess deck actually doesn't have that many creatures, so definitely having removal and keeping your removal for the Slick Shot Show-Offs. Like, don't feel the need to just burn it on a Swiftspear unless that Swiftspear is dealing an insane amount of damage. Again, Vexing Bauble can actually be kind of relevant here. They'll still get the Prowess triggers, but stopping Mutagenic Growth, stopping Mishra's Bauble, like, those things can be relevant. Like, I'm not excited about it, but it's a thing that can happen. Sweepers like Pyroclasm, it can be relevant as well. Like you said, just making sure that you are being mindful of the damage they can do, though. And again, just being selective with that removal. Something I try to do is let them attack me and then use my removal on their end step or on my turn. Because then if they're playing like a pump spell or even like a spell pierce to save their thing, they're not getting the prowess trigger in. And yeah, I might have given up a few life points for nothing, but like if their creature's gone, I feel good.
How about you, Dingo?
I would say that it's very important to be keeping your instant speed removal against Slick Shot Show Off, like you mentioned, Mapson. I think Wrath Disguise is actually like a pretty good card against them now because it also hits Steel Cutter, which is something that, it's very important to kill a Steel Cutter if you can take it off the table. Celestial Purge is a great sideboard card if you're in white to be able to combat Slick Shot Show Off and a Steel Cutter at the same time. The deck's biggest weakness, though, is probably just Solitude Ephemerate existing in the format, as well as Flage, and especially Hasty Flage. If your opponent casts a Hasty Flage against you, back it up, you're probably never coming back from that. But I think overall, the explosiveness of Prowess makes it a good deck, and one that is still definitely worth considering for Boros Energy ridden metagame, even though you think, they have Goddess Souls, they have Ocelot Pride, they're going to gain a lot of life. Is this actually a good matchup? They have Flage also. The answer is it's not that bad. It's actually not that bad for the Prowess player. Lava Dart does a lot of heavy lifting to stop like the Ocelot Pride, plus Goddess Souls synergies. You got multiple Lightning Bolts, you got Unholy Heat to be able to kill Flage even if they do escape it. So Prowess has a lot more counterplay and resilience to life gain plus removal than you'd think. So I would say Prowess is a good choice if you're looking to play RCQs, as well as if you're playing against it, just make sure you have removal for that Slick Shot Show Off. And also be aware of Delirium and Violent Urge at all times to make sure you don't die to a random Violent Urge.
It's also worth noting this deck is more popular than we have currently indicated because on Goldfish it is split into 2 decks. So we have it kind of near the bottom of our list. It's actually closer to the top. It falls right around Titan in popularity.
That is a good point. And like you were talking about, Mapson, it's always, especially if your removal is damage based, it's always good to be aware of Mutagenic Growth. You don't want to play too much into that, especially if you're doing it on their turn. So just be aware. So the next deck we'll talk about is Belcher here. And this will be the last deck we'll talk about. There's a bunch of other decks, but I did want to talk about Belcher a little bit. So Belcher is it's almost a control combo deck. So it's typically a turn 4 combo deck where it uses Goblin Tar Belcher. to do enough damage to your opponent where they're dead. It plays no lands. It plays all the dual face lands instead. So it has a lot of interaction, whether that interaction is like sink into stupor or just force negation, a lot of flare denial builds as well. So Mapson, how would you approach this matchup?
So I love Belcher. Not relevant for beating it, but just sharing. Consign to Memory is obviously good against the Card Goblin Char Belcher, but it's also good against Lotus Bloom. For those who are not aware, when Lotus Bloom attempts to come off suspend, you can counter the trigger that lets it be cast. So you're not countering a time counter being removed, but there's another trigger that goes on after that. And if you counter that, then the Lotus Bloom stays exiled forever. So countering those is obviously huge because that's its main point of pressure. They can also try to go off by just making a bunch of mana with Tameshi and trying with Seagate Restoration or something else to kill you. So keeping Tameshi off the field, and just be aware that, a lot of people, actually I think all of us are playing War of Invention. So just because they're not showing you a Lotus Bloom doesn't mean that they can't untap with one as long as they have that 3 mana. So yeah, just Consign to Memory, counter spells, and then also trying to pressure them. Be mindful of the counter magic that they have. Pay attention to their list because like if they're playing Thunder Trap Trainers, they probably have Flare of Denial. If you don't see Thunder Trap Trainers, they probably don't have Flare of Denials, and if they have Flare of Denial, they probably don't have Force Negation, or they don't have as many. So just being mindful of how that deck is constructed as well, and knowing what you do need to play around. Dingo?
Yeah, I think Belcher's obviously a very powerful deck, especially when targeted artifact hate against Lotus Bloom. If they crack their Lotus Bloom, they can war for another Lotus Bloom, and then it's like it never even happened. It was essentially a free counter spell for you. So just keep those kind of tricks in mind. I would say it's a pretty like linear combo deck. It's only really doing one thing. The best cards against it are any sort of land destruction. If you have White Orchid Phantom, that card's amazing against them. Besager's amazing against them as well.
Flicker Wisp in a similar effect.
Yeah, Flicker Wisp, you can flicker the MDFCs off of their board, and then they come back. They never come back because they just remain exiled because they're not permanents. I would say any sort of land destruction does pretty well against them. If you have Stony Silence effects, Clarion Conquer, Stony Silence itself, anything like that is pretty good. I would probably stay away from playing cards like High Noon. You can, but it's a gamble because, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword where you can't really interact against them if you have the High Noon out and you need to like multi-spell. So it's a risky one. You can bring it in. I wouldn't advise it. But I think the best ways of beating Belcher are just putting in a fast clock and then getting a lot of stuff down before they have their counter magic online is important as well. If you can get like a turn 1 Ragavan and then kill all their threats, then that's a good way of beating them. But usually you just need pressure plus 1 piece of disruption. And that's pretty good for beating Belcher. Vexing Bubble's great too. I don't know if that was mentioned or not.
Yeah, Vexing Bubble is still very good here. All right. Are there any decks that we did not talk about here that you think we should definitely be aware of going into an RCQ room?
Living in.
Yeah. Actually, one deck that didn't get mentioned, I'm surprised it didn't show up on that list, was the blue-red Corey Steelcutter deck that won RC Las Vegas not Vegas. Well, it got second at Vegas. I think that deck is really popular, just like the Corey Steelcutter sort of control-ish, mid-range-ish deck. Just like people should be aware of that.
Yeah, the Emery Tameo Affinity type strategy, that one.
Yeah.
But just more reliant on Corey Steelcutter as the main win condition. It's sort of like the old Jeskai Ascendancy deck, except you just got rid of the Jeskai Ascendancies and you're just playing Corey Steelcutter because it's a really good card. Definitely very strong. Any other decks you want to be aware of?
I personally would say you should be aware of Living In. If you tuned into the last Wizards BNR announcement, you know that Living End is apparently all the hotness, which is something that I just found out as well. Roast aside. Living End is actually like a real deck. It got Wistfulness, which has been a huge upgrade for it. It can actually take permanent base graveyard hate off the table very easily in the main decks. I would say Living End, whether it be Bant with Wistfulness or Sultai playing Deceit and Formidable Speaker and Overlord. Both of the builds are good. They both have a good matchup against Energy. And if Energy is going to be the number 1 deck, then Living End is going to be a deck that's going to see play to be able to beat Energy. So I think you should at least have it on your radar. It might not come up, but any sort of anti-cascade stuff, Consign to Memory, Graveyard Hate are obviously both amazing against it. Teferi's Lights Out.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you could think of for Living End Hate off the top of your head? Vexing Bobble's good.
Yeah, another one where Vexing Bubble and Teferi are both very good here. There's also the Esper Blink deck, which we didn't talk about. I don't think this deck is particularly strong, but I think it will see play because it's a very fun deck to play. I, for one, love playing Felly and Overlord of the Baelmerk, but it does feel like the ceiling's a little bit low on the deck. If you're looking for a grinding matchup, it's going to outgrind many decks, but a lot of decks are not interested in going past turn 4, which really make this deck struggle, because if your opponent is casting Kappa Cannoneer and a bunch of 1/1s and you're just playing Ophelia and hoping to have a 5/5 in play, you're probably going to lose that game. So I would note that that's there. It's very similar to the Jeskai deck, with the difference being it doesn't have Flage. So it's not going to kill you out of nowhere as quickly. It will definitely, once it gets going, it's going to start blinking an Overlord, getting back Solitudes, being able to Solitude things multiple times. Also, Ephemerate is obviously very powerful, and Riddler lets it keep going. So if you're trying to combat this deck, just, attack it quickly, disrupt the flicker effects if you can. Consigned Memory also very good against this deck, because if they attack with a Felly and they exile one of their own permanents, you can actually counter the return trigger that Felly has so that the permanent remains exiled. So something to keep in mind. Flicker Wisp has the same trigger that you can counter.
Yeah, Esper Blink is it's a great deck against the top 2 decks being Boros Energy and Jeskai Blink. I think it has a great matchup against both of those. The problem with the deck is that it just kind of folds to every combo deck out there, more or less. It has some game against Titan because you have Solitudes and whatnot. Folding to every other combo deck or just not having a great time beating the other combo decks is what makes that deck really struggle.
All right, Maps, and if you're going to an RCQ, what would you bring?
I mean, I feel like we all kind of made our biases known. I would definitely play Amulet. I think it is the best deck. And yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. I think it's the best
makes
deck.
sense. Yeah. How about you, Dingo?
Well, you expect me to say Affinity, but I'm actually going to throw you for a curveball.
Good.
Personally, I think Affinity is great. I don't want to touch that deck, though. Having to mulligan into some of the worst hands you've ever seen, I just can't do it. So I would bring kind of an off-the-wall pick. I'd bring Blue-White Control.
Ooh, okay. It's not one that we talked
yeah.
about, but if you're interested in control, like just hard control, not this mid-range nonsense, hard control, and you like casting Orim's Chant, Blue-White Control could be right up your alley.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the best deck at utilizing both the Orim's Chant and Teferi, and I think, as I've been mentioning throughout this entire podcast, Teferi hoses so many decks right now just by itself. So if you can assemble Teferi and then just play against a bunch of combo decks and you're sitting there with a pile of Orim's Chants and card advantage and counter spells, you feel like a gangster. But then as soon as you start playing against Energy or Jeskai Blink or something that's a little bit more fair, grindy, can actually doesn't really care about Chant that much unless you put Scepter Chant, you're going to die. But you're so good against all the combo decks. You're ridiculously good against combo decks. It's just a matter of also figuring out what sweepers you can play in blue-white, because a lot of them are either deciding between Supreme Verdict or Wrath of the Skies or Terminus, whatever you're pick your bad sweeper to put in your deck. I think you could tune it pretty well. I think you can beat Energy with blue-white. I think you can beat Jeskai Blink, but you're just going to have to suffer against all the rest of the combo decks. So if you know what your meta's looking like and you really want to just play a hardcore control deck, consider blue-white.
Yeah, I like it. For one, I usually like to take a deck that could be top 15 on Goldfish, and then I take out a bunch of the good cards and put in cards I like to play, usually making the deck worse. So I have 2 decks that I am kind of between. One of them is definitely worse, but more fun to play. So I actually like the Birthing Ritual deck. It's not necessarily that good, but I took out the Shardless Agent a Cascade package because I feel like playing 3 mana to have a 2/2 and a 1/1 is just not very strong. So instead of playing Fatal Push, which helps a lot with your Prowess matchup and your Energy matchup, which I think is really huge there. Also playing Oracle of Tragedy as a 1/3 that can block Ragvan really big. So I like that deck a lot, but something that I actually have been playing this week that I enjoyed, I liked the aspects of the Esper Blink deck with Felly and Overlord having a good long game, and also being able to recur Felly, but I also realized that Flage and Arena of Glory are broken. So I'm playing Mardu Blink, which is just taking the 2 strategies and kind of smashing them together. Now you lose Consigned to Memory and you lose Teferi, which we talked about, are both very, very good cards. So you're relying a little bit more on cards like Thoughtseize. But I'm definitely going to be trying out that deck a little bit more and seeing if it has any legs.
Okay.
So that's kind of our modern segment right there. We really dove into RCQ season that's coming up. There's a lot of decks that you can see. There's a ton we didn't talk about that are still going to be viable, and they can take any given tournament down in the right hands. So Just because we didn't talk about it doesn't mean it can't just, win a tournament. Especially these RCQs, it could be anywhere from, 8 people just duking it out. You have to win 3 rounds, or it could be a 70-person RCQ. You don't know. So just be prepared to see anything. Keep it updated. Also with Strixhaven coming out in a few weeks, there's a lot of solid cards in that set. I'm sure we'll have a future episode where we'll talk about some of the ones that we like, but I could definitely see cards there mixing up Modern a little bit at least. So what we talked about may be completely different in a month. Who knows? All right. I also wanted a little bit of a shout out as we just talk a little bit about Legacy. So recently there was the Legacy Showcase Qualifier, which is a really big Magic Online tournament. Well, high stakes, I'll say, Magic Online tournament. And our friend Brady took it down with the Allure and Show deck, which is a deck that, if you want to know more about, we spent a whole episode, like 2 episodes ago, talking about. So some cool stuff there. He's now playing 4 Acererak instead of Formidable Speaker. So just going all in on that combo. So props to him for taking that down. That's a big accomplishment. I think he qualified for what, the Pro Tour?
So he's qualified for Mox and the PT.
Mox. Okay.
Which
Nice.
This will be his first PT. Shout out to Brady, like you said. Brady's great. Been friends for a while. He when people often talk about I deserve this, I deserve that, or this person did or didn't deserve that. And generally I think in Magic, nobody really deserves anything. Brady actually deserves to be on the PT. That guy puts in a ton of work, is so methodical, plays so well. I'm really, really glad to see this.
Yeah, me too. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Legacy in the future, but a lot of cool stuff going on there. Also interested, there's going to be a lot of Strixhaven cards that I think we'll see play in Legacy too. There's especially one that looks like Expressive Iteration that, giving Days strategies, express or card advantage has always worked out really well in the past. So I'm sure it's going to go well again. We'll see.
Yeah, and I just want to add about the Legacy deck. It was super commendable to Brady just for sitting there and clicking through that Acererak combo online. Holy. It takes 80 clicks to do 1 damage. How do you do that in a super serious tournament? I'd be timing out every single round.
Yeah. Hopefully his opponents were nice and just conceded, but when there's stakes on the line, I'm sure people were not conceding right away like they usually would like a challenge or like a league. Like when there's a Pro Tour invite on the line, people are just going to be like, click it out. Let me see if you can do it in 20 minutes.
Clicks for 1 damage, baby. That's efficient.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you guys want to add?
Don't think so.
Awesome.
I just want to say thank you guys for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking about Modern.
Yeah. Thanks for coming
back.
Mapson,
Absolutely. Hopefully I'm back again soon.
Oh yeah, sure thing. This is
Mapson.
This is Dingo's 4th episode on our podcast, so basically a co-host here. So I'm sure I'll be back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just here to give Mapson a hard time about not it being banned and Titan being non-existent on Magic Online. Good luck, buddy. Hope you enjoy clicking through that Oda War and Besager loop, because I ain't conceding.
I play it once, every season. And I just I don't want to do this anymore.
I was testing Titan for one of the Pro Tours, the Modern Pro Tour, where I played Neoform, and I played against an energy player in a challenge, and I had to Besager all their lands and Otawara 20 cat tokens just to stay alive. I timed out. I was like, I can't do this. I went from 20 to 0 on that one. I was just like, yeah. That was game 1. So I won game 1. After 20 minutes, I immediately concede game 2, so that way I'm on the play for game 3, and I just timed out in game 3 with 4 minutes on my clock.
Was that the moment that you knew that it was not for you?
I was like, this deck's unplayable online. It's actually unplayable. In paper, that doesn't happen in paper, but I mean, you Titan players, you're getting rules talked about you on every BNR. They're like, due to time constraints, we're thinking about axing Titan. Jack Potter's somewhere with a bead of sweat going down his head, and so is Nathan. So, you know what? You guys know what you deserve what's coming to you.
I've had my time. If it happens, it happens. I will quit playing Magic, but,
I'll remember you.
Yeah, I'll remember you.
Good, because I'll be hiding in your closet still.
Yes, stroking those Nadus.
Yeah, Chaz shuffling the Nadus. Some people wait a lifetime.
All right, thanks for coming on. Mapson, where can people find you?
So you can find me at Expedition Map on various platforms. Also, many times I've talked about videos coming out. This time, videos are actually coming out. We've recorded some gameplay videos. Want to record a few more. This podcast will probably be out before the videos, even though the videos were recorded first. But You can expect to see those popping up on our channel within the week. Dingo, if people somehow don't know, where can they find you?
Probably under a bridge after I scrub out of the next few tournaments that I'm playing in, being all set. No, you can find me on twitch.tv/YoungDingo and youtube.com/@YoungDingo. And also, I give a special shout out since this is a time sensitive topic. I am hosting an IRL modern tournament over in Caldwell, Ohio. So if you're going to be in the East Coast and thinking about maybe taking a little bit of a drive down, I know gas is expensive right now, but hey, if you want to play in a sweet paper modern tournament for high stakes and special prizes, on April 18th through the 19th is the IRL Doghouse Apex Con edition over in Caldwell, Ohio. So if you're interested in that, hey, if you don't mind making a trip down, I'd appreciate it because I'm going to be there commentating my own tournament.
How far from Columbus is that? It's like
About an hour and a half.
Okay. So it's about 8 hours, maybe 7 hours from Philadelphia. Easy.
That's not
Look,
bad.
I'm free
That's
if
not
you
bad.
are, Dad.
It's a modern FK, and there's also going to be a Riftbound FK for those of you that are slinging some League of Legends cards around.
All right. But with that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.